This video is going to cover creating user statuses. These will be updated in real time, and they'll just keep track of whether a user is online, offline, or away. Right now this app is set to an away time of 5 seconds, so as I navigate through this, you'll notice that it set me to away and online pretty frequently. But if I log into another account, I'll pick jane@doe.com with a password of password. And I'm on the home page right now. You'll notice that the status hasn't updated yet. And that's because it's set to only update while you're in the chat room section. That way it doesn't look like Jane is online while we're over here doing stuff on other pages. You could, of course, change this. That's just the way that it made sense to me while I was making this. But if I click on Start Chatting, you'll see right away that her little icon turns green. And then it'll turn yellow after about 5 seconds. And if I click on my chat, it'll turn green again. And I can come over here. If I click in the chat box, it'll turn green. And you see it's actively updating in real time and doing sort of what we expect it to. Now, this tutorial isn't going to require you to have any previous parts of this series done because we really don't touch any of the existing infrastructure too much. You should probably just have like Devise set up, I guess. And aside from that, you should be good to go. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start off with the CSS. And that's just because we have only 2 things to add to this. So we can just very quickly get this out of the way and move on to more interesting topics. First one's going to be the actual container for the online status icon. It's going to wrap around the image and the icon. And then it's going to be the icon itself, which is just going to be a status circle. And you can feel free to just copy these, pause the video. But we're going to kind of skip past the CSS because it's really not that interesting. The next thing we can do is we can stop the server. I'm going to stop it, and then we can do a Rails, let me full screen this, a Rails G migration, add status to user, or I guess to users. We'll call this status, it'll be of type integer, and then we can run that migration. And I'm pretty sure I do all the error handling for this, but just in case, let's open up this migration, and let's set the default to be a 0, I think. And that's just in case I miss anything. That way the application doesn't blow up. And now we can do a Rails db:/migrate command. And then we should be good to run a Rails S and move on with our lives. So I'm going to save my CSS file, close it. And then we can come over to the user model to set up the logic for the CSS that we need here. So, couple parts here. The first one is going to be we're going to need another broadcast. So I'm going to full screen this actually. So we have an after create commit where we broadcast append to the user list. And if you're not following along for the actual real-time chat app, then don't worry about it. But what we do need now is we need a way to update if we have a change in the status. So we'll just say after _update _commit. And then we'll say broadcast update. And that's a method that doesn't exist yet. So we actually have to come down here and create it. And I think we just do it right here. So we'll say def broadcast update. And then we want to broadcast replace to user status. Give it a partial, which is going to be user/status. And then a user of self. And we'll be using this quite a few times. It's just mostly getting it out of the way so we can move on to the stuff that that matters. We'll come back here to take a look at like when it fires. But for now, we're just kind of building out the scaffold that we need. The other thing we need to do is we need to give our users an enum. So we'll just come right here and we'll say enum status, which is going to be a %i. And we're going to give it an offline, an away, and an online. And that's just going to allow us to reference a single point of change if we want to change what the statuses are. And we can actually use this to convert our status into CSS. So if we come down here, we can create a method, which could be in like a helper class, but we already have enough going on. This might make it a bit easier to understand. But we can do a case of status. Then we could say when online, we can do a bg-success. And this is coming from, I think, Bootstrap is where these styles are coming from. So if you didn't want to use Bootstrap, then I would suggest adding in just a background color CSS class. And I guess either making it match these names or giving it its own name. And that's just, it's just going to be the thing that changes the actual color of the icon. So if you want, you know, a way to be blue, then set the background to be blue, I guess. But basically what we're doing here is we're giving ourselves a switch so that when we go into the view, we can call this method and just get some CSS out of the user real quick. Saves us a bit of time of having to do that in the view. Okay, so I think that's it for the user. Let's actually go into the view now. And I think the first place that we do anything interesting is I think it's the user HTML page. Let me open that up on my other monitor. _user. So we have this CSS going on here. That's fine. And then we have an image tag for the user. And I think this is where we actually change some stuff. So this div is going to get a class equal to icon-container. And that's going to close with this one, I believe. We have the image tag, and then we actually do a turbo _stream _from. And it's going to be called user status. And that's just something I made up on the fly, called it user status because I wanted to. And it's actually just that easy to declare these. There's not a place where you go and register that you're going to use user status. It's just, it's called user status now, and the application's just okay with that. We're then going to do an empty div, and we're going to do a render for the users/status. And then we're going to pass in the user of type user. So all this is going to do is when we do our action cable, we're going to broadcast to a user status. So if you remember in here somewhere, we are broadcasting our update when we change the user. We're replacing the user status partial with the user that was updated. So that's all that this turbo stream from is doing. So we come in here, we say we're broadcasting to this channel that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. And then in here, we're grabbing information from that channel. And then we're going to render this partial. And then in this partial is where we actually change stuff. Status _ status.html.erb. So if we come in here, the way that we replace the contents of this is we say turbo frame tag user status. So this is just going to be the thing that gets replaced. So all we're going to do is we're going to replace the status-circle, if I can spell. We're going to replace this CSS class, and we're going to do it by just calling user.status _to _CSS. And then we can do an ID, which is going to be equal to, and this actually needs to be double quotes. And because that one was double quotes, we'll be consistent and we'll do double quotes here as well. But this is going to be an ID, and we're just going to do dom _ID of user. It's just a handy little helper. And then we should be good, but I need to close my quotes. Oh, this is why. I need to close that. Okay. It's a little bit messy with the ERB, but that's essentially all we needed from there. So if we now come over here and refresh, we should hopefully get some errors. Users _status. Users _ oh, that would be why. I think I even said this part out loud. We need to rename this. This needs to be _status.html.erb. There we go. So all of our statuses are set to a red right now. Of course, isn't correct, but we also haven't set any statuses. So one thing that I do want to cover is what happens if you shut down the server and turn it back on. You don't want all the users that are set to, let's say, online to then still be online when the server starts up, because things have changed. So the easiest way, at least that I thought of to do this, is to come into your config. And I think I did this in the application.rb file. You can just come in here. You can say config.after_initialize do, and we can just say, I don't know, _config. It doesn't really matter. And we can just do a user.update_all status user.statuses and then offline. So you'd probably want to break this out in a larger application and do something a bit more manageable. But for the purposes of this demo, this works just fine. We can actually test that because if we run this, all of these should turn to gray offline icons. But they don't. And why is that? Yep, that would be why. GitHub Copilot thought that offline was danger, but offline should actually be dark. So now if we do that, everyone should go offline. Cool. So that takes care of our application startup. It takes care of our status. One thing I did forget to do last time, which you don't have to do if you aren't following along for the real-time chat room, inside of development.rb, at the top, we just want to really quick do a rails.application.config.action controller .default _ URL options, give it a host of localhost and a port of 3000. And that is just to fix some issues I've been having with Devise that happen with Turbo that I don't fully understand, but it should just be a quick fix for now until they send out the next update of Devise, and then we can go back to just using it like we always do. Okay, so that takes care of the development. Next step, we're going to come into the views. We're going to go into rooms, and we're going to go into index.html.erb. Actually, we're going to go over to user real quick. This right here, this icon container, we can just grab this real fast. And let's actually grab the username as well. If we come into the index, we have a spot where we're just rendering a current email. I think if we just replace that, that might look a little better. But we do need to change it to be the current user. So this needs to be current user. So does this, so does this, and so does this, and so does this, but this doesn't need to be a link, I think. So we can probably get rid of that. And actually this can just be a div. So let's just grab this real quick and we can just replace this with a div and a class equal to whatever this is. And then we can come down here and close the div. And if we do that, everything should hopefully work, but we do need to fix the username still. We do have the email and the username right there. It looks like I forgot to copy over the LI. So let's just grab that real fast. Come in here. Copy over the LI, get rid of the active, and then I think we just need to close the LI, and we probably want the user to be inside the LI. So if we do that, now we have ourselves being displayed up here. Okay, so now we have the bare minimum of what we need to actually change the status. So let's come in and let's change the connection first because we need to. Let's actually generate our action cable first. So we'll say Rails G channel, and we'll call this the appearance channel. So you can just say Rails G channel appearance, and that should generate everything we need. So now we can come up here, and I'm going to collapse everything. Inside of your app, you're going to have a channels folder. And inside of your application cable, you're going to have a connection.rb application cable connection. And in here, we need to do a bit of setup. So basically, your action cable doesn't have access to the Devise user by default. So we need to say identified by current user. We need to do a def connect. And then in here, we need to say self.currentUser equals find verified user. Create a private method. And then in here, we can say find verified user. And we just want to say if verified user is equal to the environment warden.user, then that's your verified user, and they're logged in, you're good to go. Otherwise, reject. And that's just a warden helper that lets you find your user, which is very useful in this case. This is covered in the Edge guide, but it's still kind of buried. I wish there was an easier way to just generate this out. But basically, this lets us then come into like our appearance channel that we just generated. And we can do stuff like set the current underscore user status to be user.statuses online. So when you subscribe to the channel, we can set it so the user is online now. Before, this would be undefined. So that's sort of how you fix that. But the reason why this is important is because in our appearance channel, we're not actually going to do this right here. But we are going to start by streaming from our channel. So we'll say stream from appearance channel. And then in our unsubscribed, we're going to stop stream from the appearance channel. And we will call offline. So this is going to be the first of a couple helpers that we're going to create here. We're actually going to have 3. We're going to have a def online, a def away, a def offline, and let me just move this down a bit. And we're going to have a def receive data. And we'll go over these in a second. And then we'll have a private def broadcast new status, which takes in a status. And we'll start at the bottom here. So we take in a status, and then we want to call current user.update. And we'll pass in a bang there, status of status. So we just want to run this update whenever the broadcast is called. So what are we actually passing in as a status? Well, in our JavaScript file, in our channels and our appearance channel, we're going to have a couple methods in here that allow us to communicate between our JavaScript and our appearance channel. And our appearance channel is going to be able to communicate with our model by using that current user helper. So we can actually pass logic from our front end back to our back end here. So what we're going to do is in our front end, for example, we can on start say, I want to appear online, which is just going to look like this. It's going to be this.perform. And then inside of a string is going to be the name of the method we're calling. So we call this.perform online, and then inside the corresponding channel, we're going to have a online method. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you probably see where this is going. We're going to create the logic in here that's going to check for user activity, and anytime the user needs to be online, we'll set them to online using the this.perform. If it's away, we'll use away. If it's offline, we'll set them to be offline. But the actual logic inside of our appearance channel isn't really that complicated. If you're subscribed, we don't do anything because we don't want you to be online if you're in the like homepage, for example. If you're unsubscribed, we just set you to offline because it means you're either in the room and we want you to just be offline for whatever reason because you're no longer connected to the channel, or you're anywhere else doing anything else, like maybe you left the website, you closed the tab. We also just want to set you to offline. So this is sort of a catch-all here. As for what these actual methods look like, we just want to set the status to be equal to user statuses online. And then we're going to call broadcast new status, which is just going to come down here, update the user. And then when it updates the user is going to have an after update commit. And that's going to broadcast replace the user status to the partial with itself. And then the status is going to call status to CSS, and it's going to grab whichever status is appropriate and use that CSS to color the thing. That's basically the whole workflow here. So we can actually take this online and we can paste it into away, paste it into offline, and we can change this to be away, and we can change this to be offline. Now, the only other thing we have to do is set up a action cable.server.broadcast to the appearance channel and pass in some data. And this is just going to allow us to replicate our broadcasts. So if one user sends out a thing that says, hey, I'm online now, someone else sees it, they can then take it, broadcast it out to whoever they see or to whoever needs to hear it. And it just allows you to catch a couple more edge cases where one user might have missed a message because they came in at the wrong time, and allows you to sort of double up on that and make sure you don't run into those issues. But this is actually it for the Ruby portion of setting up this online status stuff. So a large portion of our focus now is going to be on the appearance channel. And this is going to be a little bit hacked together because I didn't really know the best way to cover all the edge cases. So my apologies in advance. But we're going to start by creating stubbed out methods. So we're going to say an initialize method. This comes with action cable. This is sort of called once, I think, on load, and connected is called whenever the subscription's ready. So you might initialize on page load. Like this might be an initialization, but I might stop the server and start it. And after a couple seconds, connect might get called, but initialized won't get called, for example. So you do have to be careful which one you're using. You also have a disconnected, which is the opposite of connected. So whenever the server stops doing anything. We also have a rejected, and that's going to be whenever the server tells you, no, you're not allowed to do that. We also have a rejected, which is just going to be whenever the server tells you you're not allowed to do something. We, of course, have a received here, but I don't think I used it. We'll leave it, though, just to have an example of what to do if you receive data. We also have an online. Now, this isn't from Action Cable. This is just something that we use. And this is just going to say, let's do it with console.log online. And then we'll do a this.perform online. So again, this is just calling the method inside of the appearance channel that says set the user status to online and then tell everyone and their mother that I'm online. So we're going to have this same method a couple times because we're going to have an away and we're going to have an offline. So this will be away and this will be offline. We're then going to have an uninstall. And this is just what they called it in the Edge guide. But basically you can use the uninstall to remove your event handlers if you need to. You can use an install to add your event handlers. And that's just, these could be called anything just because they don't, like connected automatically fires, but these will manually fire where we call them. So you're free to name those methods whatever you'd like. And then we're actually going to have a reset timer function. And that's just going to be what we use to actually set the away status. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. So we have everything stubbed out at least. We can come up top and we can get started. So inside of connected, I actually don't want to do a perform online. What I would like to do is just console.log connected. And inside of the disconnected, we'll do the same thing. If we come over here, let me open up my console and refresh the page. You can see that connected is already firing twice. And if we come to the home page, you'll see it fires once. You're going to have some behavior that's a bit weird here. And it's going to depend on what you're connecting to. So here it's actually firing twice because we're inside of a specific chat room. But if you're not inside of a specific chat room, like if you're on the home page, you're only going to see it fire once. So you do have to sort of deal with your logic accordingly. Thankfully, we won't run into any issues because of that. But we're connecting. What we would like to do is when we connect, we would like to call this.install because we want to add some event handlers. And we're actually going to have a helper function that we use in those event handlers. So at the top here, we're going to create a, we'll say reset func. That's going to be our reset function. And then we're going to do a timer equal to 0, which is just what we're going to use to reset the away status. So we have our install call. What we would like to do is initialize this reset func. So say reset func is equal to an anonymous function of this dot reset timer and this dot uninstall. And the reason why we're doing it like this is because we need this reset func in our event handlers, but you can't remove an event handler from a window without having a reference to it. And an anonymous function by definition doesn't have a reference because it's anonymous. So we're just creating a reference. And that's just going to allow us to not have an infinite number of event handlers sprawl out and just take over our application or have weird behavior when we move between pages. We can just do our initial cleanup and we'll be fine. So now that we have that, after our install command, we can actually do something where we do a window.add event listener, and we want to listen for a turbo::load command. And when that happens, we want to call this dot reset timer. Now turbo load, if I have the page open, which I don't, so I'll just search for turbo event on page visit. We can come over here. So this turbo.hotwired.dev/reference/events tells you all the different turbo events you can listen for. And the one we're listening for is the turbo load, which is going to happen once on the initial page load and then again after every turbo visit. And that's really useful because we do have some turbo links in our application. And we want to be able to navigate between pages and have our user status get updated while we do that. So in terms of that, we need to come over to our views and our, I think, rooms and our index. And we need to give ourselves something to listen to for this turbo load. So we can actually just do a turbo_frame_tag for an appearance_channel. And that's just going to allow us to have something to turbo load. Then we can do a div with an ID equal to appearance_channel. And that's just going to be the thing that we use to check if we're uninstalling our event listeners. So these two just allow us to sort of check what page we're on in sort of a lazy manner. Okay, the next thing we have is our disconnected, or we're just going to call this .uninstall. Our rejected is going to look almost identical to our disconnected. So we're just going to call uninstall just in case we had anything that was installed. And we'll just change this to say rejected. We don't use received, but we can come down to our uninstall where we can start doing some logic. So if we want to uninstall, it means we're no longer on the room index page. So what we can do is we can grab this div. So we'll say const, and I called this should run. Actually, tab 9 seems to have my entire code base already memorized, which is a little scary. But we had a const called should run, where we just grab that element by ID from our index page. And then we said if not should run. So if we don't find that element, it means we're not on the index page, or it means that we haven't fully loaded the page yet, which is really important to remember because sometimes you'll assume that something's broken, but it's not actually broken. You're just calling it before the page is loaded, which I definitely did while trying to make this tutorial. But assuming that we are no longer on the right page or the page hasn't loaded, we can do a clear timeout for the timer, which we created up here, and it's what we're going to use in a minute here for the install logic. But we can clear the timeout, and we can say this dot perform, and we want to perform offline in our appearance channel, which is just going to broadcast the offline status to everyone so that we go offline. So that's actually it for the uninstall. Now the install, this one's a little bit annoying. We have to do a console.log. We'll just say install. We don't have to do the console.log, but it's helpful. Now we're going to do a window.remove event listener. It's going to be called load. And then we're going to pass it the reset func that we declared earlier. Now we're going to take this and we're going to paste it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And we're going to change the second one to be capital D, capital O, capital M, capital C, ontent, capital L, loaded. So it's DOM content loaded. Then we're going to have a click, and we're going to have a key down. So the reason why we're removing all the event listeners is just in case we had any. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to say add event listener. And then we'll just paste this in 4 times. Again, it's not the most efficient way to do things, but for the sake of this tutorial, it gives you something to start with, and then you're free to polish as needed. So after we do all of that event listener stuff, we then want to call this .reset timer. That's going to be the actual logic that handles our away statuses. So inside of reset timer, first thing we want to do is call this .uninstall. Because that has a check to see if we're on the right page. And if we are on the right page, it just won't run this. So it'll just keep going with our timer. The next thing we want to do is we want to, once again, create this should run. Now, we'll know if we're on the right page at this point, but it never hurts to check a second time. So we'll say should run. And the reason why we're doing that is because this will clear the timeout. It'll set the performance, but you might be in a situation where you're looping through already and it keeps going. You set your away status after you set yourself to offline. So you go offline and then you go away, and that doesn't really make sense. But inside of this, we're actually going to do double bang. So this one is checking if we're not on the right page. And then this one is checking if we're not on the right page. So if we are on the right page. And that's just because this right here evaluates to false with 1 bang and true with 2 because JavaScript logic. But okay, we're on the right page. So the first thing we want to do is set our status to online. That's a given. Now we want to clear our timeout. So we want to say clear timer. And this is actually where we define what our time is. So in my case, I said I had a const time in seconds, which is equal to 5. So I want to do this for 5 seconds, but the timeout actually takes its time in milliseconds, which are 1,000 per second, which means we need to convert our time in milliseconds, which is going to be time in seconds times the milliseconds. Times the milliseconds. And they said you'd never use math while you program. And then we're going to set a timer equal to the set timeout. And then we're going to say this dot away dot bind this, because we need to still have the context to be able to call the away method. Because basically everything we're doing in here is with this dot whatever, just like how we're calling uninstall with this. So that's how we do that. And then we need to pass in the time, which is just going to be the time in milliseconds. So if you want to change it, you have just this one number here. So if you want a minute, it's 60. It's a lot easier to deal with than 60,000 or 59,000 and doing all those extra conversions, at least in my opinion. But okay, now we have all that. So we're going to have a bit of unexpected behavior here. It's going to be a little bit weird, but if we come over here, we're at least being set online, which is good. Let's actually open up another tab, and let's go over to localhost port 3000. Oh, I'm actually going away. That's also good. I can log in as, who do we have here? Jane@doe.com with a password. I'll start chatting. Nothing will happen. If I wait, we might see. Okay, so it doesn't happen on wait, but if I start clicking maybe, or if I refresh, yeah, so you can see after a couple seconds, something starts to happen, but we still have a little bit of weird behavior here. So the way that we resolve this is we actually come into our pages controller, first of all. So controllers, pages controller. And in here, we want to say after action set status. And then we can just say private def set status. And we can just do a current user dot update, bang, status of user statuses offline. And we'll just say if current user, because we don't want this to blow up if you're not logged in, because the home page doesn't have a before action authenticate user. So basically any page where you want to do this, where you want the user to be offline when they're on it, you just add a after action here. If you do a before action, you run into some weird behavior. So in my case, I had to do an after action just to solidify that this is in fact an offline moment. But now if I come over to the home page, you'll see that the jane@doe.com has actually been set to offline. So if I come here, I go back to the home page, offline, refresh, come in here, and it's still a bit out of sync. But that'll hopefully start to fix itself as we add in more of these fixes. So that takes care of that. The other one we want to do is the rooms controller. So in the rooms controller, we want to do a before action for set status. And we want to come down here. We'll say private def set status. And again, we'll set the current user update to be online status. And I actually don't know, you could maybe set this to an after action. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we should now see that if we move to this room, we're instantly set to online. And if we come to the home page, we're set to offline. And navigating back and forth works as you would expect. And if you come to the home page and you're still somehow logged in, there's actually one other thing we can check to make sure that we're properly signed out and logged out of all things. And that is in our Devise controllers. So moving back to the previous episode really fast, if we come into our routes, we created the sessions route, but I did a dum-dum and I didn't spell sessions right. So that's the first thing we need to change. And then we can come into our users controller and our sessions controller, and we can make sure that we're disconnecting properly when we log out. So if I open this up on my other monitor, we can uncomment the destroy, and we can say, when we log out, we want to call action cable.server.remote connections.where the current underscore user is the current user. And then we can call, not delete, we can call, oops, one password. We can call .disconnect. So that's how we forcibly disconnect someone from an action cable WebSocket. And then we can call, you guessed it, current user .update status of user .statuses offline. And here we don't need to do the check if we're the current user, because if we're in this method, we're definitely going to be the current user. Otherwise, we got a lot bigger problems than doing this check. But that should, in theory, set everything to a point where it works. But we can just check real quick because everyone's away. I can click, it sets me to online, and then if I exit, it'll set me to offline. So I think that's all the edge cases that we had, and I think we now have a fairly robust online-offline system for statuses. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.